When grocery store security started following a black shopper through every single aisle, watching his every move and treating him like a criminal, he didn't complain, didn't cause a scene, he just quietly finished his shopping, and what happened at checkout shocked the entire store. Jerome Williams had been looking forward to this Saturday morning grocery run more than most people might expect. After completing a grueling 72-hour shift at St. Mary's Hospital that included 3 emergency cardiac surgeries, 2 complicated bypass procedures, and countless patient consultations, the simple act of selecting fresh produce and planning meals felt like a peaceful retreat from the intensity of life-and-death medical decisions. At 35, Jerome had already established himself as one of the region's most skilled cardiac surgeons, but he maintained a deliberately low profile in his personal life. He drove a modest sedan rather than the luxury vehicles favored by many of his colleagues, lived in a comfortable but unpretentious townhouse, and preferred casual clothing during his time off. His philosophy was that genuine worth came from service to others, rather than displays of wealth or status. What made Jerome's grocery shopping particularly meaningful was his role in planning meals for the weekly community dinners he hosted at the free clinic he had founded 3 years earlier. Every Saturday morning, he carefully selected ingredients that would feed 40 to 50 people who might not otherwise have access to nutritious food. The grocery list in his pocket represented more than personal meal planning. It was part of his broader mission to address food insecurity in underserved communities. The Saturday morning rush at FreshMart grocery was in full swing. Families pushed overflowing carts through wide aisles. Elderly shoppers carefully compared prices on their weekly essentials, and weekend meal planners filled their baskets with ingredients for elaborate dinners. The store buzzed with the familiar rhythm of suburban shopping, the squeak of cartwheels, the beeping of barcode scanners, and the quiet conversations of people planning their meals for the week ahead. Among the crowd of shoppers was Jerome Williams, a 35-year-old black man dressed in a simple navy polo shirt and khaki pants. He moved through the store with the efficient purpose of someone who knew exactly what he needed, checking items off a carefully written grocery list while navigating between other customers. Jerome carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in professional settings, though his modest clothing gave no indication of his actual status or achievement. What should have been a routine grocery run was about to become a masterclass in how racial profiling operates in everyday spaces and how assumptions about criminality can be shattered by unexpected revelation. Carl Henderson had developed his surveillance methods through what he believed was careful observation and pattern recognition over 15 years in retail security. He had worked at department stores, electronics retailers, and now grocery chains, always convinced that his instincts about potential shoplifters were based on legitimate behavioral analysis rather than racial profiling. Henderson genuinely believed he was colorblind in his security work, pointing to occasional instances where he had surveilled white customers who exhibited what he considered suspicious behavior. But statistical analysis of his surveillance reports would have revealed a disturbing pattern. Black and Latino customers were followed and questioned at rates dramatically higher than white shoppers, even when controlling for factors like time spent in store, purchase amount, and actual theft incidents. What made Henderson's bias particularly insidious was his ability to rationalize his discriminatory behavior through seemingly objective criteria. He had developed a mental checklist of suspicious behaviors that included examining price tags carefully, spending extended time in any single section, making multiple trips through the same aisles, and interacting extensively with store employees. The problem was that these behaviors were completely normal aspects of careful shopping, comparison shopping, and friendly customer service interactions. When applied consistently to customers of all races, these criteria would have flagged hundreds of shoppers daily as potentially suspicious. But Henderson's biased application meant that normal shopping behaviors were interpreted as criminal reconnaissance when performed by black customers, while identical actions by white customers were viewed as smart consumerism. Henderson had never been formally challenged on his surveillance methods because his store locations had maintained acceptable loss prevention statistics. Store management praised his diligence without examining whether his methods created hostile environments for customers of color or contributed to the kind of discriminatory treatment that could result in legal liability for the company. Over the years, Henderson had convinced himself that his heightened attention to black customers was justified by what he perceived as higher rates of attempted theft. He had developed elaborate theories about shopping patterns, timing, and behavioral indicators that he believed gave him unique insight into criminal intent. The reality was that his preconceptions were creating confirmation bias that interpreted normal behaviors as suspicious when performed by people who fit his racial stereotype. From the moment Jerome entered FreshMart, multiple aspects of his appearance and behavior triggered Henderson's discriminatory alert system. Jerome's systematic approach to shopping, his careful examination of items, and his obvious familiarity with the store layout all registered as potential red flags in Henderson's prejudiced assessment framework. Henderson began his surveillance from the produce section, positioning himself behind displays of seasonal fruits while tracking Jerome's movements. He observed Jerome selecting apples, oranges, and vegetables with the care of someone planning meals for multiple people, noting how Jerome examined items for quality and freshness before adding them to his cart. In an objective observer's mind, Jerome's behavior would clearly indicate someone knowledgeable about food selection and meal preparation. He was obviously shopping for quality ingredients and planning nutritious meals, a kind of careful consumerism that grocery stores actively encourage. But Henderson's racial bias filtered this normal behavior through assumptions about criminal intent. Henderson began following Jerome through the produce section, maintaining what he considered a professional distance while keeping the shopper under constant observation. He watched as Jerome selected fruits and vegetables, noting how he examined items for quality and freshness before placing them in his cart. In Henderson's biased interpretation, Jerome's careful shopping wasn't the behavior of a discerning consumer. It was reconnaissance for potential theft. His systematic approach to grocery shopping looked like casing the store layout. His examination of price tags suggested he might be planning to switch labels or conceal expensive items. As Jerome moved from produce to the bakery section, Henderson continued his surveillance, positioning himself behind displays and around corners to maintain visual contact. He observed Jerome selecting fresh bread and pastries, adding them to his growing collection of groceries. But Henderson's surveillance wasn't as subtle as he believed. Jerome had noticed the security guard's attention almost immediately, the way Henderson's eyes tracked his movements, how the man seemed to appear in every aisle Jerome visited, and the obvious nature of his attempted concealment behind merchandise displays. Jerome had experienced this type of surveillance countless times throughout his life. In department stores, electronics retailers, bookshops, and now grocery stores, his presence seemed to trigger extra security attention that his white friends never reported experience. He'd learned to recognize the signs: security guards who appeared wherever he shopped, employees who offered excessive assistance, and the general atmosphere of suspicion that followed him through retail space. Rather than confront Henderson or complain to management, Jerome decided to continue his shopping while remaining aware of the surveillance. He had important purchases to make, and he wasn't going to let one security guard's prejudices disrupt his Saturday morning routine. Henderson's surveillance intensified as Jerome moved through the store's various sections, each stop reinforcing the security guard's baseless suspicion. When Jerome spent several minutes in the spice and international foods aisle, carefully selecting herbs and seasonings, Henderson interpreted this as unusual interest in high-value items. When Jerome consulted his phone to check a recipe or shopping list, Henderson saw coordination with outside accomplices. The tragic irony was that Jerome's careful shopping reflected his dual role as both a medical professional who understood nutrition and a community leader who wanted to provide the best possible meals for people who rarely had access to high-quality food. His systematic approach came from years of medical training that emphasized precision and attention to detail, qualities that served him well in both operating rooms and meal planning. As Jerome moved through the bakery section, selecting fresh bread and pastries that would complement the community dinner menu, Henderson positioned himself near the coffee station to maintain surveillance. He watched Jerome interact with the bakery staff, noting how comfortable Jerome seemed with customer service conversations and how knowledgeable he appeared about different bread types and preparation methods. Henderson's biased interpretation transformed these positive interactions into evidence of suspicious behavior. Jerome's friendliness with staff became manipulation tactics. His knowledge about food products suggested insider information for theft planning. His comfort in the store environment looked like familiarity from previous surveillance or theft attempts. The reality was that Jerome shopped at FreshMart regularly because it was convenient to both his home and the free clinic, and because the store carried the diverse ingredients needed for the multicultural community dinners he organized. The staff recognized him as a polite, regular customer who always paid his bills and treated everyone with respect. But Henderson's 15 years of discriminatory surveillance had created a worldview where black customers were inherently suspicious until proven otherwise. Normal shopping behaviors were viewed through a lens of presumed criminal intent, while identical actions by white customers were interpreted as evidence of good citizenship and smart consumerism. As Jerome continued through the frozen foods section, Henderson's surveillance became increasingly obvious to other customers. A middle-aged Latina woman noticed the security guard following Jerome and shook her head in recognition of a pattern she had witnessed before. An elderly black man shopping with his granddaughter whispered something about the way they watch us while glancing meaningfully in Henderson's direction. But Jerome maintained his dignified composure, refusing to be intimidated or rushed by the discriminatory surveillance. He had experienced this treatment countless times throughout his life, in department stores during medical school, in electronics retailers when purchasing equipment for the clinic, and now in grocery stores while shopping for community meals. Jerome had learned that confronting security guards or complaining to management often escalated situations unnecessarily and could result in police involvement that might put him at physical risk. His strategy was to complete his shopping efficiently while remaining aware of his surroundings, demonstrating through his actions that he was exactly what he appeared to be: a law-abiding customer making legitimate purchases. As Jerome moved into the household items section to select cleaning supplies and personal care products for the clinic, Henderson's surveillance reached new levels of intrusiveness. The security guard positioned himself at the end of aisles, openly staring, while pretending to review inventory reports on his clipboard. Henderson was now completely convinced that Jerome was planning something criminal. The shopper's calm behavior under obvious surveillance looked like criminal confidence. His systematic approach to shopping suggested detailed reconnaissance for future theft. His friendly interactions with staff appeared to be relationship-building for insider theft operations. Every aspect of Jerome's normal shopping behavior was being filtered through Henderson's racial prejudices and transformed into evidence of impending criminal activity. The security guard had constructed an elaborate fantasy of theft planning based on nothing more than his biased assumptions about black customers. What Henderson couldn't see, what his prejudices had completely blinded him to, was that Jerome Williams represented everything positive about community leadership and professional achievement. The man he was surveilling as a potential criminal was someone who literally saved lives daily and dedicated his personal time to addressing healthcare disparities in underserved communities. As Jerome approached the checkout area, after completing his carefully planned shopping, Henderson positioned himself near the customer service desk to observe what he believed would be the culmination of Jerome's criminal planning. He was certain this was when Jerome would attempt whatever theft or fraud he had been preparing throughout his 45-minute visit to the store. Jerome selected a checkout lane staffed by Maria Santos, a veteran cashier who had been working at FreshMart for 8 years. Maria greeted Jerome with the professional friendliness she offered to all customers, beginning to scan his items while making small talk about the weekend weather. Henderson watched from his surveillance position, waiting for the moment when Jerome would reveal his true intention. In his biased worldview, this was when the whoplifting would occur, when Jerome would attempt to conceal items, switch price tags, or create some kind of distraction to avoid paying for merchandise. But Jerome simply stood patiently while Maria scanned his groceries, occasionally commenting on sale prices or asking about the store's return policy for a particular item. His behavior was completely normal, completely legal, and completely contrary to Henderson's paranoid expectation. As the transaction neared completion, Maria announced the total $21,483 for a cart full of groceries that suggested meal planning for a family and stocking up on household essentials. Jerome reached for his wallet without hesitation, preparation to pay the full amount. That's when something unexpected happened that would shatter Henderson's assumptions and transform his understanding of who he had been surveilling for the past 45 minutes. As Jerome opened his wallet to retrieve his payment method, Maria noticed something that made her eyes widen in recognition and surprise. "Excuse me," Maria said, her voice carrying across the checkout area loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Are you Dr. Jerome Williams?" Jerome smiled modestly. "Yes, I am." Maria's expression immediately shifted to one of profound respect and gratitude. "Dr. Williams, you saved my father's life last year at St. Mary's Hospital. He had that massive heart attack, and you performed the emergency surgery. I can't believe you're shopping at our store." The revelation hit Henderson and everyone within earshot like a shockwave. The man Henderson had been following and surveilling as a potential criminal was Dr. Jerome Williams, one of the city's most respected cardiac surgeons. Maria continued, her voice growing more emotional. "My father talks about you all the time. He calls you his guardian angel. Because of your skill and quick thinking, he was able to walk me down the aisle at my wedding 6 months ago." Jerome accepted the praise with the humility typical of medical professionals who regularly dealt with life-and-death situations. "I was just doing my job, Maria. I'm glad your father is doing well." But Maria wasn't finished sharing what she knew about the man Henderson had been treating like a criminal. "Dr. Williams, aren't you also the doctor who started that free clinic downtown? The one that provides medical care for people without insurance?" "Among other things, yes," Jerome replied quietly, clearly uncomfortable with the public attention but gracious in accepting Maria's gratitude. By now the conversation had drawn the attention of other customers and staff throughout the checkout area. Henderson stood frozen behind the customer service desk, finally understanding the magnitude of his discriminatory assumptions. Dr. Jerome Williams wasn't just a respected cardiac surgeon, he was a pillar of the community who dedicated his time and expertise to helping underserved populations. The man Henderson had been surveilling as a potential shoplifter was someone who literally saved lives for a living and provided free medical care to those who couldn't afford it. The assistant store manager, Jennifer Walsh, had been called over by another cashier who recognized Dr. Williams. Walsh approached the checkout lane with obvious embarrassment and respect. "Dr. Williams, I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience you may have experienced during your visit today," Walsh said, glancing meaningfully in Henderson's direction. "We're honored to have you as a customer, and we want to ensure you feel welcome in our store." Jerome looked puzzled. "I'm not sure what you mean. My shopping experience was fine." "Well," Walsh continued carefully, "it's come to my attention that you may have received excessive attention from our security staff during your visit." The euphemism hung in the air as other customers and staff realized what had been happening. Dr. Williams, a man who spent his days saving lives and serving his community, had been followed and surveilled throughout the store like a common criminal. Jerome's expression shifted as he understood what Walsh was referring to. He looked over at Henderson, who was still standing near the customer service desk with a clipboard in his hands, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "I see," Jerome said calmly. "Yes, I did notice the extra attention from your security staff." The understated acknowledgement was somehow more powerful than any angry confrontation could have been. Jerome had experienced racial profiling while grocery shopping, but he had maintained his dignity and completed his shopping without letting prejudice disrupt his day. Walsh turned to Henderson, her expression making it clear that there would be serious consequences for his discriminatory behavior. "Mr. Henderson, I think we need to discuss this situation in my office immediately." Henderson realized that his 15-year career in retail security was about to face serious scrutiny. He had just spent 45 minutes treating one of the community's most respected citizens like a criminal based on nothing more than racial prejudice. As word spread throughout the store about Dr. Williams's identity and Henderson's surveillance, customers and staff approached to express their appreciation for Jerome's medical work and their embarrassment about his treatment at FreshMart. An elderly white woman who had been shopping near the deli counter approached Jerome with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Williams, you performed surgery on my husband 3 years ago. I can't believe the way you were treated in this store today." A young Latino man waiting in another checkout line called out, "Doc Williams, You treated my daughter at the free clinic when she had pneumonia. Thank you for everything you do for our community." The outpouring of recognition and gratitude completely transformed the atmosphere in the checkout area. What had started as discriminatory surveillance had become an impromptu celebration of a community leader who had positively impacted countless lives. Jerome accepted the praise with characteristic humility while loading his groceries into bags. He had experienced racial profiling, but he had also been reminded of the positive relationships he had built throughout his community through his medical practice and volunteer work. As Jerome prepared to leave the store, Walsh approached him one final time. "Dr. Williams, I want you to know that this incident will be thoroughly investigated, and we will be implementing additional training to ensure it never happens again. Would you be willing to accept a full refund for your groceries today as an apology?" Jerome considered the offer thoughtfully. "I appreciate the gesture, but I'd prefer to pay for my groceries. However, if you'd like to make a donation to the free clinic in the amount you would have refunded, that would be meaningful to me." The suggestion was perfect, transforming a moment of discrimination into an opportunity to support community health care for underserved populations. Within hours, videos of the incident would be shared on social media, where they would be viewed millions of times and spark conversations about racial profiling in everyday spaces. The hashtag FreshMart discrimination would trend, but it would be accompanied by stories about Dr. Williams's community service and the positive impact he had made on countless lives. Within days, FreshMart would implement new training programs for all security staff, focusing on unconscious bias and professional customer service standards. Henderson would be terminated from his position, his discriminatory surveillance finally facing consequences after 15 years. Within weeks, the store would partner with Williams's free clinic to provide healthy food access programs for low-income families, transforming a moment of prejudice into an opportunity for community partnership. But the most important outcome wasn't the policy changes or the corporate apology. It was the reminder that assumptions based on race can blind us to the humanity and contributions of the people around us. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't confrontation. It's the quiet dignity of people who refuse to let prejudice define their worth or disrupt their purpose. If this story moved you, remember that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity while going about their daily activity. Share this reminder that we never know who we're really encountering, and that respect should be given freely rather than earned through revelation of status or achievement.